You're listening to Girls with Grafts, a burn community podcast created by Phoenix Society for Burn Survivors, a leading nonprofit dedicated to supporting the burn community. In this podcast, we'll talk with burn survivors, share resources to help with supporting and improving burn recovery, and discuss how to prevent burn injuries. Here are your hosts, burn survivors and Phoenix Society's marketing team, Amber Wilcox and Rachel Kudlak.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Girls with Grafts. I am Rachel Kudlak. I'm one of the hosts of the show. And today, unfortunately, we won't be joined by my lovely co-host, Amber Wilcox, but that's okay. We have an amazing guest on the show today. It's a special week. It is Face Equality Week, and Face Equality Week is hosted by Face Equality International. And this year's theme is My Face is a Masterpiece. So we'll talk more about Face Equality Week later in this episode with our guests. So let's get going by thanking our sponsor and meeting our guests today. So today's podcast is powered by our new Phoenix partner, Kerecis. From a small town in Northwest Iceland, Kerecis develops, manufactures, and sells patented fish skin soft tissue reintegration products. Kerecis Graft Guide is their intact fish skin, especially developed for the management of burn wounds. Kerecis fish skin grafts contain fat, protein, elastin, glycans, and other natural skin elements and are supplied in multiple shapes, variants, and sizes. You can learn more about Kerecis by checking out their website at kerecis.com or reaching out to them at info@kerecis.com. So to learn more about them and their products, be sure to visit our new Phoenix partner. We'll have all that information listed in our show notes as well. So without further ado, let me introduce today's guest. We have Charlene Pell on the show today. Charlene is an award-winning author and the founder of Facing Forward, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping individuals with facial or physical differences navigate staring, improve social interactions, and communicate with confidence. After surviving a I can't say that word today. After surviving a plane crash that burned 64% of her body and severely injured her face and hands, she rebuilt her life and identity, a journey she shares in her memoir, which we'll be talking about more here soon. So her memoir is In This Altered Body, a survivor's story of resilience and love. Motivated by the lack of psychosocial support during her recovery, Charlene developed resources and workshops to help others facing similar challenges and has spoken internationally on resilience and recovery. As a former VP of Communications, she holds a master's in Communication Studies and lives in Greensboro, North Carolina with her husband. So thank you so much, Charlene, for coming on the show today.
It's my pleasure, and thank you for having me.
Yes. Well, I know I just read your bio. I messed it up a little bit, but that's okay. I always feel bad when it's just me at the beginning and listeners just have to listen to me, ramble on for a few minutes. But, I'm going to let you talk now by just sharing a little bit more about your burn survivor journey and, your injury and kind of where you are today.
Well, catastrophic is not the easiest thing to say.
It is not. I'm always bad at some of those big words. They get me.
My journey actually started 31 years ago. At the time, I was vice president of communications for one of the most successful design centers in America, a job I had worked long and hard for many, many years. I was engaged to this amazing, adventurous man named Roger Craig. And I was sort of at that moment in my life that you kind of strive for, where you're sort of living the life you always dreamed of. And my fiance at the time had an export business as well as an automobile business, and the export business was in the Bahamas. And so he had spent a lot of years before we even met, living in the Bahamas and at homes in the Bahamas. And one of the first dates or trips that we took is he actually flew me to an island called Cat Island. And I talk about that in my book about that was for me, for those of you who have ever seen one of my favorite movies called Out of Africa. That was my sort of moment that, be sitting in the cockpit and leaving Fort Lauderdale where we lived and flying out over the Atlantic Ocean and just seeing how beautiful it was, and then landing in Cat Island, this very remote island that 31 years ago, those of you who are old enough to remember that 31 years ago, the cell phones were just beginning to come out, and they were these big clunky things. And this island had no electricity. Everything was generators. There was no such thing as an airport or a manned airstrip. There was a 24-foot runway, no lights, no hospital, no EMTs. There was one doctor on the island. So when Roger had been a pilot, my gosh, since he was 14 years old. He was a great pilot. And at this point, we had been to the island, oh my gosh, probably 100 times. And this was, as I think I may have mentioned, this actually happened 31 years ago. And so we were coming in for a landing, and what happened is that our right landing gear did not lock. And at the end of this runway, there was a hill, a big hill, of course, with trees. And so Roger was trying to get the airplane back into the air to clear the treetops. And unfortunately, the left wing clipped the trees, and that catapulted the airplane and caused the airplane to crash. And actually, I think that I sustained a concussion because when I came to, I was bent over. I was, of course, sitting in the co-pilot seat. I'm not a pilot. I was never a pilot. I just sat up there to be, next to Roger. And so, I came to, and, I looked, to my left, and I got my bearings, and there, the cargo had shifted. There was no way out of the plane. And in the plane, it was a 10-passenger plane. And in the cockpit, there's a small window, and Roger jumped out of the window. I mean, he couldn't pull me out of the window, was yelling to me to come and jump out of the plane. And when I made my way over to the window, I looked, and everything on the ground was on fire. And the wing was gone from the airplane. And so, I was about at least 6 feet up in the air, and I was going to have to jump. And, he was telling me, just jump. I'll brace your fall. Just come on. And so I did jump. And then we were trying to make our way away from the crash because Roger was very concerned because that airplane had the fuel to go back to Fort Lauderdale. So, it was just a matter of time until that plane was going to explode. And anybody that's been to the Bahamas before, to a remote island, the brush is unbelievably thick and dense. And, I'll never forget, he was trying to part the brush to help me get through. And he was saying, be careful, don't, because a lot of thorns and everything did not get all scratched and cut up. And the next thing I know is that I'm propelled to the ground, an explosion propelled me to the ground. And at the time I was wearing a tank top, and I had on shorts, and I had on tennis shoes and very thick white socks. And it is absolutely amazing how much that little bit of clothing protected my body, because that's the exact outline of my burn. The scoop neck above the breast, and then, the top of my thighs, of course, were burned, and my arms and my hands and everything. But at the time, after I'm propelled to the ground, um, I guess that protected my eyes a little bit, even though my face was severely burned. But when I got my bearings, I couldn't see Roger. There was smoke everywhere. I yelled out and screamed out, couldn't find him. And I actually heard the voices of little children. And sadly and miraculously, little children heard and saw this catastrophe. And, I yelled out to those little children to keep talking, because they were leading me out. And if they hadn't been there, I could have gone the other way, and I surely would have died, because it was so far to ever get to the road. But it was about 40 feet, unbeknownst to me, until, gosh, a year and a half or so later, when I saw where they had to take a bulldozer to bulldoze in there 40 feet to get to the remnants of this airplane crash. So anyhow, that's why I so firmly believe that God spared my life that day, because there's absolutely no rational way to explain how we got out of that initial crash site, 45 more minutes a ride in a truck to get to another landing strip, where the fellow who, we had a house there, and that's where the landing strip was, coming in to go to the house that day. And the fellow that helped with the house and met us there, he drove us to another landing strip, got on a walkie-talkie, telling everybody on the island what had happened. There were two doctors. This was, again, just such a blessing. A Navy flight surgeon, an orthopedic surgeon, who were friends of ours, who rushed over to the other landing strip and said they would fly with us back to get us to Miami, so that we'd have a chance to live. Because if we had been taken to a hospital in Nassau, we would have died, because they didn't have the capability to care for that kind of burn. But anyhow, it was a flight against all odds. The pilots ran out of fuel, and they had to stop and refuel. They brought the wrong fuel trucks out. That delayed the flight. Then we got back in the air, and the doctors were actually patched into the doctors at Jackson Memorial Hospital. And, I could hear them talking about our condition and exchanging, our blood pressure and different metrics about our condition, and that we had amazingly not gone into shock. But anyhow, after all of that, and it's 5.5, nearly 6 hours later, we get to the Miami International Airport, and there's no ambulance. And I just could not believe that could be possible. And, I kept thinking all along, I'm going to die. We're never going to make it. And, I looked over at my fiance, and I could see how swollen he was getting, how red he was. His last words that I ever heard him speak were, I just spent $2,500 to have that landing gear repaired. And, I was able to walk off, again, miraculously walk off the airplane, crawl onto a stretcher, never realizing that the whole front of my body was burned, even though I was sitting the whole time. I was sitting when I was riding in that truck or sitting in the airplane. I couldn't sit in the seat. I sat on a visor you put in your car window to keep the heat out. I was sitting on the floor with my feet propped up, because psychologically, there's a process called disassociation where your brain disassociates from your body because you couldn't possibly live through or endure that pain. But, for some reason, I didn't even grasp until months and months later when I saw myself that the front of my body had been burned because where I felt the impact was a flash fuel burn, on my back. It was like the only thing I could think of that people could relate to was someone throwing a vat of boiling water on you, that kind of thing. But anyhow, I saw him, but it didn't register with me, even though I felt horrible. But anyhow, once I crawled onto, and they helped me onto that gurney, and I was lucid enough to give them my sister's phone number. Then, of course, they start, if they ask you all these questions, giving me drugs, and then I'm out for 91 days. Later when I come out of a morphine-induced coma. So anyhow, that was the harrowing accident, the miraculous survival, and then, like so many survivors of something so devastating, and so many of the people you and I have had the pleasure and the misfortune that this happened to these people, that's how we had to meet them. But 5.5 years of OT and PT and at this point now 70 operations, and still, even last year I had to have a very painful surgery on my eyelid. My eyelid's been an ongoing problem, and I'm sure that's a problem for a lot of survivors if you have facial burns, and because the grafts shrink, and we continuously had problems trying to protect my cornea. So I'm, I'm so thrilled that the Phoenix Society, like the state of the survivor. I don't remember what year you started that survey, but that's so important because, I can remember, gosh, it was probably even 2019. I did this study of 22 burn centers in the southeastern region, and I had 22 questions. And I actually presented this it was a poster presentation at the American Burn Association that about the long-term effects of a burn injury. And it's just so fantastic now that you all and other organizations are gathering this data to substantiate the need for not just the psychosocial care that we know is invaluable, but for these kinds of things I'm talking about, and so much more. But I'm getting off topic here, but again, because, I've just been so involved in so many realms. And I think, I don't know, is there something else you want me to say specifically about that?
No, that was perfect. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Obviously, and we'll dive more into some of the ways we've been working together more closely, but, I don't think I actually knew your burn injury story. So thanks for sharing that. And it is kind of crazy to think about that you have so much memory of that flight back to Miami. And, you're not the only survivor, obviously, that has kind of had that. And I think that just shows truly how strong survivors are, because it's that initial reaction where you don't actually realize what happened. And you can almost, like downplay it of like, oh, I have some burns on my hands, or like you had pain in your back, but you truly don't realize, the burns injury to the extent that you had. We've heard from survivors too before that, they didn't even call an ambulance. They didn't go to the hospital right away because we all have done it. When you're cooking, you may get a little burn on your hand, and sometimes, it may be bigger, but people can downplay it because they don't realize the extent that burn just caused, that injury.
That's so true. And none of us, including me, I never even thought about the fact that the largest organ in the body is your skin.
Mm.
And you can have what seems like the tiniest little wound that opens you up to infection. And just like you're mentioning, that's why it is so critical, to address, a burn.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, like Dr. Michael Peck is one of the doctors who saved my life. And I always loved what he said, that there's no such thing as a minor burn if it happens to you.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's a story behind every burn. And some of those stories are very, very emotionally painful.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We encourage people
For
to go and to not ever minimize your own injury. And I think something else too that's so important about that is that, my burns are very visible. When people meet me, they don't always know what happened to me, but they know something major happened to me to cause my difference. Whereas other people whose burns you may not see because of their clothing may experience even more profound emotional suffering and pain over that burn. And particularly when it comes to, as you get older and issues of intimacy and depending on where the scar, the burning or whatever it is on your body and your feelings and emotions tied up with, do I tell the person, before, how do I handle that? What do I do? And I'm going to sound like the cheerleader here for the Phoenix Society. But again, I encourage anybody listening to this, if you haven't been to a World Burn Congress or if you haven't participated, in something virtual where they're talking about sexuality and intimacy, it's just so important because you can learn from other people who went through that same agonizing experience and talk to them. And it really, to me, it's just gives you so much hope and knowledge, and to see that about that. And that was again, like, I talk about that for me, that a couple of things I want to be sure and say that in the initial stages of my recovery, when I was lying this was in a rehab hospital, I couldn't do anything. I could barely lift my, I had to learn how to talk. I had to learn how to sit up. I had to learn how to walk. I was in a wheelchair for a while. But when I was lying in that bed, unable to hold a phone to my ear, a social worker had given my sister a Phoenix Society brochure. And this, again, 31 years ago. And the Phoenix Society was in its infancy compared to where it is now. And so my sister, who's my shero as well in my story, and just so much devotion and love and support, as well as my mom. But, she told me about this, and I said, I want you to call the Phoenix Society. I want to talk to somebody. And so she called and held the phone up to my ear. And I was talking to Alan Breslow. And for those of you listening who don't know, he was the founder of the Phoenix Society, a brilliant, fascinating champion of burn aftercare, a multi-talented human being, and his beautiful, loving wife who is still alive. And sadly, I think Alan died in 2021, along with another one of my favorite mentors, who is James Partridge. But anyhow, I'm talking to Alan on this phone, and I'm listening to this man that is full of life and energy and telling me about all these things that he's doing and asking me all these questions. And he also was in a plane crash,
Mhm.
very similar to mine and very similar burns as mine. And so there was an instant rapport. And that one phone call gave me the hope to know that there was life after this, even before I got to my first World Burn Congress. And then getting to that first World Burn Congress, very much like someone we both know and love, J.R. Martinez, shared in his chat with you all, the fact of, you walk into that hotel or the lobby or the reception or whatever it is, and all of a sudden you see all of these people that look like you, and they're laughing and smiling and hugging and engaging, and you meet people that are married or have had families, or so you see the possibilities that are out there. So I want to be sure and say that, and eventually we're going to get to media.
Yes, don't worry. We will dive into that. But no, thanks for sharing that. When you were telling your story, I obviously was thinking about Alan's, because I know about his plane crash and his injuries. And yeah, I mean, that's what Phoenix Society was built on, was the power of peer support, and how, easy just one phone call or one peer support visit. And, we know, we have a lot of early survivors listening to us who aren't always ready to get connected with someone else, but even just like sitting in the hospital room with someone, with a survivor, having one phone call, having one support group visit, whatever it may be. I mean, I think that it's clearly was impactful in your journey, and can be, I know, so impactful for others too. So
Right.
I want to encourage our survivors to, kind of take that chance and meet with another survivor, even if it's not talking about your burn injuries, even if it's just watching maybe TV or something together, or listening to a podcast. You can listen to one of our episodes together. But and Charlene, I do want to talk a little bit too about your nonprofit, Facing Forward. Kind of what inspired you to start that organization? Like, what's the heart of that mission to you?
Well, as you've gathered from my previous comments, I spent many years volunteering for the Phoenix Society, and 6 years serving on the board of the Phoenix Society. And then in some of my work, and the more work and research I started doing, I realized it doesn't matter what causes somebody to look different. We all experience the very same sort of feelings and emotions, and whether it's the staring that we encounter, or that our loved ones encounter, or the inappropriate questions, or being underrated, people having lower expectations of us. And I think it was just I started a support group. Let me go back. I believe it was 2000 when I did or maybe a little bit before then, when I created a workshop called What to Do When People Stare. And what I did is I went back and I researched extensively whatever I could find about staring. And probably the most prolific scholar on that is Rosemary Garland Thompson. She's written quite a few books about that. And even before her, there was Frances McGregor, who really was the first person to identify, this is going to go back to burn survivors, but for burn survivors, the issues, the social issues that they faced, reintegrating into society. But anyhow, another person a lot of my work is based on is Nancy Echtkoff, who wrote a book called The Survival of the Prettiest. Extensive research, again, about the beauty mystique and just the elements of our culture that emphasize beauty and flawless skin and that sort of thing. But I started doing all this research, and I developed this program and started presenting the workshop. And the program is really looking at unconscious bias, stigma, the beauty mystique, the cultural norms that, in some parts of the world, people still believe that disfigurement or these kinds of accidents or congenital conditions are karma or witchcraft. I mean, it's amazing how prevalent that still is. And then something that I feel like nobody in this area ever looked at as far as an intervention to help people with visible differences and facial differences was the actual physiological aspects of a stare. The fact of that, my research led me to learn that if there is literally 1 millimeter of a difference in a facial feature, it triggers something in the brain that causes us to stare. And then again, that fact that flawless beauty is the number one most desired human trait. It's sad in our culture that people value beauty more than health and education. The more money is spent on beauty than health and education. So anyhow, that, and I'm going to tell you that the primary catalyst for the whole workshop that I created I was actually at probably my second burn camp. I have to share this with you because I was thrilled to hear that you had actually attended Camp Susquehanna. Yeah. One of the very first camps that I ever volunteered at was that camp. And that was, again, oh my gosh, 28, I don't even know. That was decades ago. And that was absolutely remarkable to see what an amazing camp that was all those years ago, because I bet there were at least 40 or 50 campers at that event. Sure. It was fabulous, even that long ago. But I was actually in the waiting area on the last day where all of the parents were coming to pick up their children. And if I heard this once, I heard it 100 times. Parents saying, I'm just so sick of people staring at me and staring at my child and why do people stare? And I thought, you know what? These people are all suffering, and there's no reason for them to suffer, because there is a solution to this. Not that we're going to end staring. People are going to stare till the end of time. But what we can end is what we and loved ones do with that. Because, there's no way that I'm going to allow a stranger that I may never see again to ruin my day or my life because they stared at me. Yep. Now I didn't get there instantly. It took me time, because again, until I got to the Phoenix Society, I really didn't have any guidance other than my own expertise from communications. But, and what I learned, through, again, it was till I got the Phoenix Society and James Partridge. A lot of my work is based on his research as well. But, so anyhow, I developed this, and the kind of the key questions that we go through in this workshop are, so that we see that we all stare, is that, what do I feel, whether I'm burned or disfigured or not? What do I feel when I encounter somebody with a visible difference? And the emphasis is on the verb.
Mhm.
What do I think? And we talk about it. And then what do we do? What action? Do we look away? Do we avert them? Do we stare? Do we intrude on their personal space? We go through all of these interactions and share this stuff and practice some social interaction techniques. And then, of course, you have resources. And there still is a what to do when people stare brochure with actions you can take and kind of an overview. And so anyhow, I wanted to move that out into other organizations. And so probably the first one I started working with was the Children's Craniofacial Association.
Mhm.
And again, just, as this is an important point to make too with that organization. I have a book probably this thick with a description of all the different kinds of conditions that can cause a facial difference.
Yep.
And there's no way on earth that the general public can ever know this information. I can't. I have to look up stuff. There's all the time I'm meeting people that I don't know what causes their difference, and I have to educate myself about it. There are no classes about that. You know what? I actually correct myself my church just recently held a wonderful series over the summer, demystifying disability. And I actually was introduced to one of the first organizations that they are trying to teach the public some etiquette for interactions with people with disabilities. But as you and I know, sadly, disfigurement, particularly facial disfigurement, is never even considered in the realm of disability. And that presents even more of a challenge for us. As again, you're probably leading into that question.
Yes. No, but it's definitely interesting. And I definitely do want to come back to your book, but like I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, it is Face Equality Week. And I know we're both members of Face Equality International. This week's all about, the theme is My Face is a Masterpiece. And we're going to talk more about media and, the portrayal of those with visible differences. But, just kind of listening to you talk there, it's like, in some ways we are getting better at, looking at disabilities, especially when we think about media. And, so many shows and movies have characters with visible disabilities in terms of maybe they're in a wheelchair or, that's kind of the first one that comes to my mind. But where are those with, and that it's great, don't get me wrong, that we're making those strides forward in that scene, but where are those positive portrayals of those with, scarring on their face, for example, or, what are disabilities but aren't considered as like mainstream disabilities, I guess is probably the better way to describe it.
Well, as you've noted, it is much more commonplace to see, particularly people in wheelchairs. Now, sadly, the majority of those actors you see in wheelchairs do not actually have a disability.
Yep.
They're not wheelchair users. So that is a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably the second most noticeable disability you'll see is people with amputations.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that has to do with the Boston Marathon bombing, Paralympics. If you'll think about it, a lot of we see a lot more people with disabilities around the times of the Paralympics. but then that presents a stereotype in and of itself, because that tells the average person with a disability, you've got to be an overachiever, you've got to excel at something before society will accept you. But sadly, in media, people with any sort of facial difference, there I'm going to tell you kind of three wonderful exceptions at the end here, but primarily the only time you would see anybody would be like a dermatological ad, where it's a pharmaceutical company that has a product that they want to cure or fix, and they overemphasize the fact that, as they say, you can achieve clear skin, like having clear skin is the most important thing you can do. Forget about the horrible pain and the symptoms that you may be experiencing. They're focusing on what they know is most important to our culture, and that person that has psoriasis or some other visible difference, that they want clear skin so that they can fit in, because our society constantly tells us that you're not, well, number one, we don't want to see you because you're invisible in media, and that you're undervalued. And, certain entities do this intentionally, like pharmaceutical companies, like the beauty industry. Other entities, we're discovering as we do more and more research in this area, amazingly aren't even aware of some of this. But when you think about, I think the latest figures right now, 1 in 4 or 27% of the United States population has a disability. Yet less than, it's 1.9% of the characters on film and television have any kind of disability. And as I said, most of those people do not have the real disability. Now, and then particularly for burn survivors, the research that I've been doing is showing, for example, there was a really interesting study. It's called Faces Depicted in Modern Visual Media. And out of the 48 characters that were with facial burns, that most of them had facial burns, and they were villains.
Yep.
And so, or in TV, what we see when we see anybody, particularly with a burn injury or some other facial difference or disfiguring condition, it's on a medical show. And the number one show you're going to see that on is Grey's Anatomy.
Yep.
And Grey's Anatomy has had several episodes featuring burn survivors, but they're victims, or they demonstrate something that, can't think of the scholar's name right now, but she noted that often happens in these shows is that they rename the survivor. And this actually has to do with one of your sponsors, with the fish skin. I actually had an opportunity to meet them in October at the Southern Medical Association show, because I had heard of it, but I'd never seen how fascinating that is. And I have yet to meet anybody who's actually had it, but look forward to seeing that and the outcome with that. But anyhow, in one episode, there's a burn survivor that they of course they don't call them survivors. There's a victim that's treated with this fish skin, and they literally, the doctors or residents or fellows or whoever's treating this particular guy, they renamed him Merman. So see, these are the kinds of things so that they're doing when we are on TV. It's pathologizing. Yep. And just going back like to the dermatological ads, one comes to mind that I find so offensive, and it starts off with introducing Ned's plaque psoriasis.
Mm.
And so you're introducing a really attractive young man as his disease. So see, this just continues to say disease, contagion, stay away,
Yep.
avoid that people that have these sorts of differences. There, one of the things too that really got to me a couple of years ago, that I thought, if I hear this one more time, I'm going to scream. And it was usually during Women's History Month. And the National Advertising Agency, and I believe it was called the Female Quotient, which is a great organization working for gender equity and equal pay and all aspects of TV, of film and television, for women. And, their goal was admirable. And what they do, they produce a number of spots that were called "If I Can See Her, I Can Be Her." And they actually did have someone, I believe, who was in a wheelchair to have their token disabled person as part of their campaign. But not surprisingly, there wasn't anybody with any sort of facial difference. And, I heard that, oh my gosh, like for years. And if you think about, I really want all our listeners to think about this when you're watching a show. You're going to hear this over and over and over. Where hosts, anchors, shows, major media people, particularly on television, whether it's gender or nationality or ethnicity or whatever representation we're talking about, they're going to say, I went for 30 years of my life, and I never saw anybody that looked like me. This happened with the Asian culture, with the Spanish culture. I think Amira Ferrara made those remarks when she won either an Academy Award or a Golden Globe. These marginalized communities are either invisible or they're misrepresented in film and TV. They're stereotyped. And so, it's like you're telling us that if we can see you, we can be you, but you're hiding us. So you're telling people that look like me, well, you can never be a reporter for a news station. You can never be a doctor. By the way, there are never any doctors on these medical shows. No difference. You can never be a professor. You can never be a psychologist. You can never be a movie star. But I want to switch gears now and tell you, hope is on the horizon, and there are going to be some challenges, but anyhow, I am hopeful, and I'm hopeful because particularly what I've seen in the Down syndrome community. In 1986, Chris Burke was the first, actually he was the second person with Down syndrome to be a major star on TV. And Chris Burns had a favorable, multifaceted, was a character portrayal. And Chris literally led over since 1986. As I go back and I study this, and I've got a long list now, a nice long list of actors with Down syndrome that have been in various shows and films. And we're seeing that more and more. And you see them much more often in ads for major advertisers. And it's just incidental, which is what I really think needs to happen for us. If somebody that looked like me just happened to walk through in a ad for any major product, you're just one of 20 people that you show that person for a second or 2 seconds. that would make a huge impact, because it would include us, that we're like everybody else. We just look different.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm seeing that more and more and more. You know, and we don't have time to go into all the specific examples, but I'm seeing that. A couple of years ago, when we all were just elated to see J.R. Martinez and Dancing with the Stars, in the weeks that J.R. Martinez was on that show, he did more to dispel the myths of disability and disfigurement, I think, probably maybe than anybody, because the audience could see, how charming, how smart, how engaging, how talented, how determined that he was, and that he was living life to the fullest. And, that wasn't really all that long when you think about the recovery from his injury. And then, of course, getting his start on All My Children. Again, that was a very important, pivotal moment for us as burn survivors. I was going to say, I'm really catchy. I know that catchy. Fabulous on America's Got Talent, and my goodness, America was voting for these people. America was supporting. America was cheering these people on, and America was saying, we want to see these people. But then now let's look. How often have we seen them? Since then.
Yeah. And it is interesting, kind of finding that balance. And you touched on this of, in Ketchy and JR's, time on Dancing, America's Got Talent, they were obviously there for their talent and determination and skill, but there was that component where they had the opportunity to talk about their injury and, how far they've come. And so, what you mentioned earlier, I just want to bring back up of finding that balance of, sharing survivor stories and, awareness and educating, the world, but also just having extras of burn survivors or those with other visible differences of, they don't have to have a storyline. They don't have to have this elaborate, this is how I was burned, this is how I'm doing now. Like, they can just be normal, average people in shows and movies and not villains.
Absolutely.
So it's definitely about, a balance. And I think we're making some strides, and yes, having like JRs and Catchies be able to tell their story, but we have a lot of catching up to do of just having average people like looking like us, because we are normal people. We're all, I say average, but you know what I mean? Just, your normal characters in the shows that maybe don't have this elaborate burn injury story, but can just be part of the show.
Absolutely. And one thing we need to do as a community of people with visible differences, and it takes time. I mean, we don't have a pool of talent yet. And unfortunately, again, that's because of the discrimination and the bias. You've got to be able to get to an interview, but you've got to be able to take some acting classes to be able to get to the point. To do this. And that's something too, that it is slowly evolving. But until we get some people that are the writers, the directors, the producers, the people, behind the camera as well. And we are actually, I think will just mention this. There, about 2 years ago, there something called CARD, CARRD, was formed, and Rachel is a part of this group. Amy Acton, Phillida Swift, Dr. Lisa Gear, Jen Wallace. I think that I get everybody. Rachel, I think that over the last couple of years, we kind of all have our are areas that we're delving into. For me, it's a lot of the research and trying to figure out what are these organizations, who are these people doing this work, who are the director, who are the people that we might be able to get to and influence. And Lisa's done, with her TED Talk and trying to reach out to casting people, and has addressed the Writers Guild. So we're discovering SAG-AFTRA, and then there was the whole writers' strike during a couple of years ago, with all of that stuff going on. But it takes time to try to start connecting with people that would be receptive.
Mm-hmm.
And to get in, to get past the gatekeepers that, are blocking this sort of thing. And yes, as you've mentioned, it's not about, like I said before, it's not about being a Paralympian or being a superstar. We're talking about people, all people, anybody, regardless of their appearance, that has the talent and the skill to do any job in our society, needs to have an opportunity. And kind of taking that back to International Face Equality Week, which this year will be the 7th anniversary, although I'm trying to remember what year we actually, maybe it was 2019 or 20, that in the United States, the charities that are members of FEI, we agreed that May 19th would be the official day, but it's kind of the whole week. Whatever week May 19th falls on, that's the week that we celebrate. And this is the second year that we've used that theme, My Face is a Masterpiece. And it started last year because we wanted to try to do something that would be more of an outreach to people that didn't have any sort of disfiguring conditions, our allies and the people that are interested in our cause. And we wanted to use art as a social tool to talk about the injustices that people with facial differences experience. And there were a lot of wonderful things that took place last year with, now didn't Phoenix sponsor the Grace Flott?
That had a virtual workshop.
Yeah, that was a fabulous workshop. And very profound. And for those of you who don't know Grace, she's just an amazing artist. Isn't she in Seattle?
Yes.
Yeah, out in Seattle, a burn survivor. Just doing extraordinary work. But again, there are all these things that hadn't happened before, people getting together, doing workshops or art projects, or just bringing people, expanding our network of our community and our outreach and our awareness and our education. And, pretty much to me, when I think about face equality, face equality would be the ideal when every teacher all over the world expected the same of somebody with a disability or a difference, didn't underrate them, didn't discourage them. I mean, my goodness, an excellent book that comes to my mind, a young woman, I believe it's Ariel Henley, A Face Like Picasso. I don't know if you've read that. I mean, it's just horrible to read about her experience, and that a teacher could tell her, you've got a face like Picasso, to say something so unkind. And I mean, there's so many stories. I've read so much research of other marginalized communities, these sorts of things that, teachers in our society often don't get the training or the education. I mean, we really need the programs in the community, on the grassroots level, very much like they address, like the beginning of the way HIV was addressed throughout the world. That you've got to get to people. Actually, one of the programs I created for middle school students, very powerful program, Outside Inside, You Decide, introducing students to all kinds of amazing young people that, when I say amazing in the fact that they all had a disability, but they were living life to the fullest. That kind of amazing. They could be whatever they wanted to be, like the message we're trying to get across to the universe. And if face equality existed, we would see people like us in film and TV, and it would just happen every day. There wouldn't be anything unusual about it. There would be more education in society. There wouldn't be workplace discrimination. The new and not so new, but really coming into being where it can be so harmful that we just had this workshop about the other day, AI. The recent article in Forbes that they consulted Face Equality International about that a lot of the AI doesn't even recognize our faces, and what the angst and upset and inconvenience, and again, the discrimination that somebody experiences because, they can't pass the test to be considered a human being. So, I mean, we're making great. I keep saying great because I guess I just want them to be, I don't know. When I look back 31 years ago to where we are now, from my perspective, it's taken way too long, but we're making really, really good progress. But as you wisely said, we have a long, long, long way to go. I want to just be sure to say one more thing, and that is two more things, because, and I've talked about this a little bit on social media, and I just don't have time to do much on social media, but anybody who has not seen the show The Irrational, particularly if you are a burn survivor, there were 2 seasons. It was on NBC. If you have Peacock, you can watch it anytime. It is a groundbreaking, pivotal moment for burn survivors with facial differences. And I think for burn survivors anywhere, because the leading actor, Jesse Martin, plays a brilliant professor, a multifaceted individual. It's a great story, a great plot. It is not about his burn. His burn is a tiny little bit of the show, but unlike so many shows, it's not trying to teach you or preach. It's a fabulous show, about crimes and how he aids his ex-wife, who's an FBI agent, in solving crimes through psychology and his behavioral science expertise. I don't know if it's been renewed yet, but 3 million people were watching this show. And I just so hope it is renewed, because this show is teaching TV that it's okay. You can have somebody with a facial disfigurement. And if you've got a great story and if you've got good actors, it doesn't matter. Yeah. So, again, I'm so hopeful. And then one other thing too is that Great Britain is ahead of us in a lot of ways. They still have a lot of the challenges that we have as well. But several years ago, as a result of another wonderful member of Face Equality International Changing Faces, fabulous organization who has a long history of working to change media representation, had a campaign that probably all of you have seen at one time or another that is called I Am Not Your Villain. And as a result of that very successful social media campaign, the British film industry decided to never fund any film again that used facial disfigurement, as a villain or a pitiful outcast. And that's just amazing. And we only would hope that would happen here in America, but we've got a long, long way to go, because Hollywood knows that anything out of the ordinary that is considered like a spectacle is typically a box office major hit. So we have a long way to go.
We do. And I just want to make sure our listeners know too, I know we talked about face equality, obviously the week, international. We'll have a bunch of links in our show notes. So if you're watching this video on YouTube or Facebook, be sure to check it out on Apple or Spotify. So you get all these links. We'll have, we'll make sure we have information about the I'm Not a Villain campaign, that Forbes article. You can sign the petition to tell Hollywood visible differences don't equal evil. There'll be lots of good things in our show notes. So we always have show notes in case you're a listener and you didn't know, but I want to definitely make sure we call that out today. And Charlene, I know we are coming up on our time here, but we covered a lot. We'll definitely have to have you back on the show, because I know we didn't get to dive into your book and some other topics, but we'll also have your book linked below for folks as well. But kind of before we close out, I do want to ask, we have our last two final questions we'll ask you, but how can folks and how can our listeners get in touch with you if they have questions or want to learn more about your research?
Sure. Just email me at charlene@facingforwardinc.org.
Awesome. Well, like I said, we'll definitely have to have you back on the show. We covered a lot today, but I know there's still plenty more that we could cover. So before we do ask the final two questions, do you have anything else you want to share with our listeners today?
Well, now you said before you ask the two more questions, I guess I better just hear the question.
Well, the first one is just, what's one piece of advice or encouragement you'd want to give to someone, navigating life after a burn injury?
Always, always, always keep an open mind to the infinite possibilities. Don't write off anything. It's so easy in the beginning. When you're faced with limitations, very often, and disappointment, and you just think, oh my gosh, how can I ever have a meaningful life, or how can anybody ever love me again, or how can I ever do this thing that I love to do? Just keep an open mind. And if you find yourself really struggling, reach out for professional help, and definitely be open to having a visit from a SOAR representative, or, if a SOAR representative isn't available in your area, well, gosh, you can always find them, I guess, online through the Phoenix Society. Reach out to me. We can always, find some way to offer help. So just never give up.
I love that. Well, our final question is our Phoenix partner question today, sponsored by Kerecis. So their question is, what is one thing you hope our listeners take away from the podcast today?
I probably just said the one thing I hope that they take away. Again, just probably we've all heard so often that statement, nobody could ever love me again if I look like this, or how could anybody ever love me, or what if somebody sees my scar, will they love me, or just again, stay open to the possibilities that are out there. Seek help. Definitely ask for help when you need help, and take advantage of the resources that are available through so many means, whether it's the Phoenix Society, whether it's Facing Forward, whether it's Face Equality International. And I guess I would also just say a huge thank you to every corporation, individual that supports this kind of work and makes it possible. And again, thank you, Rachel and Amber. And I hate that I missed Amber today. And I think it's great too that you two were at different places in your life when you had this experience. And let me say, backtrack. It's nothing is great about sustaining a burn injury, but I'm glad that you two have those two different perspectives. Yeah. And actually, when I say that nothing is good, that's, if of course, I wish that I didn't have to experience the pain and the suffering and some of the ongoing pain and discomfort that I experience. But I can tell you that through the experience of being a burn survivor and living the last 31 years as a burn survivor, I have had the most amazing life. I have met the most phenomenal people that I never would have had a chance to meet. I never would have met the remarkable man who loves me and treats me like a princess, who is my husband. And again, that I never would have had the life that I've had. So, something good had come out of this.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, do I love the ongoing itch I have? No, but the bigger picture here, is totally worth it. I mean, I wouldn't trade it for anything. And hey, we wouldn't be here on Girls with Grafts talking about media representation if we weren't survivors, or maybe we would have been here some other way. But yeah, I'm a big believer in everything happens for a reason, and it, you might not be able to see that reason right away, but later on in your journey, I truly believe everyone can look back and, see the good that you can do, or the good that came out of a burn injury. I truly believe that.
As do I.
Well, Charlene, thank you again so much for coming on the show today. I've really enjoyed just learning so much more about you and your injury and your journey. And, I mean, you have so much knowledge, especially when it comes to media representation. So I just so appreciate it. And like I said, we'll definitely have you back on the show because we have a lot more we can dive into. But I appreciate you joining me for a special Face Equality Week podcast episode.
Thank you very much. Totally my pleasure.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Girls with Grafts. If you are enjoying this content, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.